Welcome to Ballot Battleground Nevada. I'm your host, Ben Margiott, a reporter at KRNV News 4 in Reno. I'm passionate about making politics in this critical battleground state more digestible to the average voter and pushing past the talking points to press politicians for answers. On this show, we take deep dives into the people, ideas, and debates shaping Silver State politics.
I have never seen a level of depravity where you're actually attacking cancer survivors and cancer patients. And I believe that that's really a part of the violation of our shared decency in Washoe County.
That was Beth Smith, president of the Washoe County School Board, opening up to us on last week's episode about the personal attacks she faced because of her cancer diagnosis. Listeners will remember she was labeled Beth Death Smith by right-wing donor Robert Beadles and depicted as the Grim Reaper in a campaign that's caused her to worry about her family's safety. If you didn't listen last week, pause this show right here and go back and start there. This is part 2 of our series on how and why nasty political attacks have become the norm in Northern Nevada and what we can do about it. This week, a deeper dive into how the attacks faced by Reno Councilman Devon Reese, who is gay, affect the LGBTQ community. He was labeled and depicted as Drag Queen Devon.
Yeah, the mailer is, it's both blatantly homophobic, it's probably transphobic, but it's also just filled with lies.
A little bit later, we'll continue our conversation with UNR's Dr. Amy Pason about the so-called Dignity Index, what it is, why it matters, and just how dangerous some of these attacks are on that objective scale. But first, we spoke to Andre Wade, the state director for Silver State Equality, a group that pushes for LGBTQ rights, on the toll this all takes on marginalized communities who are more often targets of these attacks. Andre Wade, the state director for Silver State Equality. Andre, thank you so much for joining us for Ballot Battleground Nevada today. We appreciate it.
You're welcome. Happy to be here.
For folks who might not know what Silver State Equality is, why don't you tell us a little bit about the organization and what you do in your role?
So Silver State Equality is a statewide LGBTQ plus civil rights organization here in Nevada. Our mission is to bring the voices of LGBTQ plus people and our allies to the institutions of power to create a world that is healthy, just, and fully equal. So we do that by passing poor quality laws here in Carson City, getting poor quality candidates elected to office, and we have a host of programs that we run, and we're really centered on public education around a lot of different issues and advocacy on behalf of the LGBTQ plus community here in Nevada.
Let's dive right in. We're talking about this mailer that was sent about Reno Councilman Devon Reese, who is gay. It depicts him in drag. It calls him Drag Queen Devon. You've seen it. What was your reaction personally, emotionally, the very first time that you saw it?
When I heard about it and saw it, it was just an eye roll, just these sort of played out tactics that are used to try to make fun of queer candidates and I guess rile up whose ever base is doing it. And, I didn't really have any emotional reaction aside from like, here we go again, which is just some unnecessary things that we have to see sometimes.
Some supporters of the people that put this mailer out when we posted our story said, it's just a joke. It's just a cartoon. Why are you taking this so seriously? It's just a joke. How do you respond to that?
If it was just a joke, it fell flat. And if it was just a joke, it wasn't funny. And if it was just a joke, it didn't work. And I don't think that from a political standpoint, you want to put your resources into joking about people and issues that are important to folks. You have candidates that should be running on principles and values and stating how they're going to improve the lives of their constituents. And so if your campaign is based on jokes, then you're setting yourself up for failure.
Do you see it as homophobic and then also transphobic since it's invoking drag queens?
Sure. Homophobic, sure. Transphobic, I would say no, because there's a distinction between, drag performers and people who identify as transgender. But it's definitely playing on the anti-drag queen story hours that are happening in Washoe County, in Reno. And so they're really trying to use that as leverage, I believe, or try to use it as leverage. But their attempts to even go against the drag queen story hours in libraries is failing. And so it's just not a good use of resources.
Are these types of attacks, from your view, rising in recent years, and does that trouble you?
We haven't seen too much here in Nevada. However, during the last election cycle, there were some anti-transgender mailers that hit people's mailboxes across the state. And there were some anti-transgender radio ads, primarily in Spanish, that hit the airways. At the end of the day, it was really hard to see those. I got a mailer. We talked about it. We did a press conference with some partners about it.
I'm not super familiar. Do you mind sharing a little more detail about that?
There were mailers that were sent out that were just anti-trans and just talking about the infiltration of bad people into our communities, into our politics, and using these messages to try to gin up people's fear and anti-LGBTQ plus sentiments ahead of the election cycles. And these misinformation and disinformation about transgender people and trans children and gender affirming care was really the primary messaging around the postcards and the radio ads. So if you fast forward to our legislative session, we had quite a few transgender specific bills that passed through the legislature and were signed by a Republican governor. And so these tactics didn't work. We're centered on good policy and doing what's right for people. And while these anti-trans ads were an attempt to win on some level, at the end of the day, it was ineffective.
What do you think these types of attacks do to, say, young people that haven't come out yet, or LGBTQ people that want to run for office, say, and they see this and they worry that they might have to face these kinds of attacks?
You have young people who see these ads and hear these messages, and you have people who are piquing their interest as whether or not they want to run for office themselves as LGBTQ plus people. And so we know that this can have a negative impact on the mental health of young LGBTQ plus people. So we are concerned about that. But we also know that these tactics really energize people to want to run for office. And so we have a leadership academy that we're going to have in August that is designed to help prepare people who are LGBTQ plus to run for office one day. And so we want to make sure that this does not have a negative impact on people's, not only the mental health of young people or just anyone in general, but if people feel the need that they want to run for office to combat some of this stuff as well, that we can play a role in supporting their candidacy.
What is the best way to combat it?
I feel that we just have to keep to what's true for our values and what we're trying to do ultimately, and it's to create a world that is healthy, just, and fully equal for everyone. And there's no need to play low, to be negative into your campaigns, especially when these negative messages can really hurt young people unintentionally. And so we encourage people just to run a fair race, fair, steady, earnest race, and that will be more important. So if for some reason you don't win that time, you still can have something good to help you move on to your next campaign and not feel defeated because you used some tactics that were outdated and ineffective.
In this case, Councilman Reese has been in office for several years. He's taken many votes over the years and taken many stances, some of which they could have gone after. Why instead do you feel that they went after his identity as a gay man?
They probably think it's low-hanging fruit, that's an easy target. And that's usually the case, that we are seen as easy targets, that we are not full citizens, that we are not equal participants in our communities, that we are lesser than. And that's just not the case. And Devon won that part of his race. And so, again, the tactics were ineffective. But people want to use our identities as jokes, but a lot of people have moved on from that. We have a lot of people who are LGBTQ plus identified who are across the nation running for office. There's record numbers of people who are not only running for office, but are winning their races. And even that includes transgender folks who are deciding to run and actually win races. And so it's tired. And one day the opposition will understand that and use other tactics to hopefully try to do better in their races.
All right, Andre, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate getting some of your time.
No, I welcome. Thank you for the platform. I welcome any conversations like this, and thank you for uplifting this issue because it's really important.
A special thanks to Andre for coming on the show. As we've teased, we'll wrap up this two-part series with part 2 of our chat with Dr. Amy Pason, focusing on her work to rank the phrases, nicknames, mailers, and ads on what they're calling the Dignity Index, how the index was created, why she believes it matters, and where some of the attacks we've heard rank and why. It was an illuminating conversation for me personally, and I hope you enjoy it too. Let's talk about the Dignity Index. So tell us about that. It's a project by you and many students at UNR and elsewhere to kind of rank certain campaign materials and statements on this index. What is this project about?
Yeah, so there's a national group called Project Unite who came up with the Dignity Index. And in fact, there were researchers in Utah in 2022 that developed an 8-point scale, and they've been promoting it along the way. And this 8-point scale is really based on, do we show somebody that we disagree with dignity and respect? And in terms of our political language, how much are we saying it's an us versus them, and there's a them that we actually want to kill and destroy, or there's an us versus them, but we're willing to listen, we recognize them as members of our community, and we're willing to work together even though we may disagree on issues. So this 8-point scale is really kind of doing those gradations of, is there an us versus them in our language? Are we saying it's a Republicans versus Democrats election and Democrats need to win because we've got a better path forward? Or is it an us versus them because there's a them that's trying to destroy our nation? And the more we get down into there's a them to be conquered, the more we get into language patterns that we actually see in international conflicts or Civil War type conflicts, all the way into genocide, right? We make it okay for people to hate another group enough to even be willing to kill them. So that's where the Dignity Index comes in, is trying to look at statements that we make. And yes, we're going to talk about an us versus them. It's our side and their side. That's politics. But how are we doing that? Are we doing it because we're saying there's an us versus them, but our policy is going to help more people? Or there's an us versus them, and we're going to add in those things like we're seeing in some of our state elections. The Nevada Democrats talking about the veto villain of Joe Lombardi. Whereas you could just say that we think that the governor is not doing the best thing that we need for Nevadans. Listen to our policy, right? It's the same type of, we're against them, but the language is different. So that's what we're trying to track and look and see, just what the temperature is on our political rhetoric.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up. And the veto villain is a good example because Lombardo is kind of pictured as a character. Robert Beadles is, of course, on the right side of the political spectrum doing this, but he's not the only one in our community. There are people on the left doing this as well. So I appreciate you mentioning that example. Is the goal of this essentially to have an objective scale to the point where, to your point earlier, people who are in a certain party are less likely to rank something that their own party does as dangerous? This is kind of an objective scale where you guys can say 1 through 8, this is this, so that people's own biases don't come into it and they don't treat language from their own party differently?
Yeah, that's the idea of this scale, is that if we just look at language, are we using certain phrases? Are we using certain words? Can we rank this on a 1.8 scale? And what they found in the Utah pilot study is that when you just present people with the words folks say, that we are pretty reliable, regardless of the party, of ranking it. I see this as not as dignified or showing more contempt than this side, again, regardless of party. And that's sort of what we've been trying to do, is we've been building a study to look specifically at our Nevada State Assembly and state Senate races. I was working with my undergraduate students this past semester and getting them to see and utilize this scale, see where they were ranking folks. So again, students who have no personal stake in the game. A lot of my students do come from California, so Nevada politics were completely new.
Yeah.
So it really was kind of an objective way to figure out where people are ranking on the scale. And what we have noticed at the very beginning is, especially for folks who might be running for state office for the first time, they're not using the partisan talking points. The veto villain idea did not come up in most of the candidates' materials if they were running as a Democrat. And in fact, a lot of those candidates weren't even showing a lot of partisan colors on even their websites, right? It might be their personal favorite colors for their campaigns.
Interesting.
So seeing where that outlines. But what we had seen is that Twitter, Facebook, places where candidates might have been sharing information that they didn't create, those were the places where we saw more contentious language.
Interesting. Can you walk us through the 8 steps here?
Yeah, so 8 is kind of the top positive point. So if you're up at that 8 point of the scale, it's somebody who might even stand up for the other side. Hey, if I'm a Democrat and my Republican colleague has a good policy or plan, they really want to fund higher education, for example. But the folks on my party say that's not where we want our money spent. We want our money spent this way. Would you be a person that's willing to go against your own party to say, no, the idea I think is best and has the best evidence to it is with that other side, and I'm willing to stand with that other side, right? That's kind of the utmost.
Okay.
Do you have enough respect for the other side that you are willing to give up whatever group belonging you might have with your own side to say this is the path forward?
Yeah.
Right? At the very low end of the scale is the language we see, again, in those situations where genocide is possible, right? Not to put a too strong point on it, but when we start to say that somebody is less than human, right? They're cockroaches, they're infesting, they're poisoning our blood, as we've heard in some of the presidential campaign rhetoric this year, right? That's the stage where we make it acceptable to hate another side so much that they are not even worthy of respect as just being a human being. And then we get these variations along the way. So sort of the middle of the road is there's an us versus them. It's Democrats versus Republicans, and we want our side to win. We're not really interested in working with the other side. We're just going to be trying to maintain our group identity, right? And try to get our team to win. And so, again, you can kind of go up and down from that side. Is it an us versus them, but we're curious and we're willing to have conversations with the other side? That's going to move us more towards that 8. Or when we start getting down on the lower end of the scale, it's an us versus them, but we are morally better than the them. Or it's an us versus them, and they're evil, and they need to be stopped, right? All the way to they're evil, and they need to be destroyed.
Can you give us a few examples of where some of these phrases that we have seen in Nevada politics might rank on the scale? I'll put you on the spot a little bit, but you brought up, veto villain. I don't know if you've looked in kind of the more local races, some of the language that Robert Beadles has been using, or as you mentioned, some of the state legislature races. Can you give us a few examples of where these might rank?
Yeah, so I think, in the Beatles examples, when you've got Death Smith, right, and putting her in the Green Reaper's outfit on the mailer that went out, I think Lucy was one from a previous election.
Yeah.
So again, we're literally using the association of evil, the devil in that case, death, destruction in that case, right? That's going to put that kind of language more on the scale of probably my students would have put it as a 2 or a 3, right?
Wow.
It's because they're evil, literally using the symbolism of evil. And so that's why we need to destroy them. Not because we've got a better path forward. It's just they're so bad that we just have to get rid of them from the equation altogether, right? The Democrats' veto villain, again, if you looked at some of the visual materials, they kind of put the chalkboard graffiti-ish devil horns on Lombardo. Do we read that as necessarily as nasty because we see it more cartoonish? Maybe not, but again, it's still trying to make that association. What they do then is try to show which policies were vetoed and why that's negative. So maybe that is more of just trying to focus on the policy side and not a personal attack. So there may be a more balance, which again, maybe is putting it more of that mid-range of 4 or 5, depending on the language. But we also see that there's some unnecessary and where more people would put as uncivil language by using descriptors that make it seem worse than it is. It's a ludicrous idea. It's damaging. This is an attack on our sensibilities. When it was a veto of a bill, right? That just signals to us that we need to work together. And there's definitely in that sense, not a sense in the veto villain or on the Lombardo side, we need to make sure we get our folks elected so I have this veto power. There's no willingness there to say, and when we get to the legislative session, we're willing to talk to one another and work together. That's not in the language at all, right?
Yeah.
Differently, if we look at Jackie Rosen's ads when she first came out, the fact that she starts out and says that she's one of the most bipartisan legislators, that she doesn't walk the party line, that's the language that we would signal more of the 6 and 7, the higher end of that range, because it's showing that she does support her party, but she supports the people that she represents most. And whatever supports the people best, that's who she's going to work with.
Gotcha. I just thought of a great segment idea. We're going to have to bring you back every week. We're going to watch the ads together and see what stands out to you from them. No, that could be fun. What now are you guys doing all summer long and probably into the fall to kind of finish up this study? What's going to come of it? What do you hope to glean when this is all said and done?
Yeah, so part of this study came about because Jill Tolles, who was previously in the Assembly, who also taught communication studies at UNR. That's how I know her before.
I spoke at one of her classes back in the day. It was fun.
Yeah. So she's the one that when she became exec director of the Gwynn Center, that she, I think, went to some dinner or fundraiser for Washoe Republican Party, I think was the context, where she met the Project Unite folks and Tammy Pfeiffer, who helped put together this Dignity Index. So it was really at her urging to say, I've heard about this project, and what I'm seeing in politics is that we do have folks that are leaving the state legislators, that's leaving some of our local offices in Washoe, because it's just not worth it to them to put up with the harassment or the threats or just the fact that they can't get anything done when it's, one party that's driving the agenda and nobody else can get a word in edgewise otherwise. So she had this idea that we really need to look at this and take this up. So that's where the project originated. So kind of from Jill and the Gwynn Center to really expose me to a different way to think about our negative politics. And so what we were doing this past spring semester is between a philosophy class and my class on persuasion, we had our undergraduates start to collect the campaign materials for our state assembly and state senate candidates. So all of the candidates that were running that we could find. So what's on their website, what's on their social media, what are they using? Obviously we can't quite get at all of the mailers and all of the places, but what's some of the publicly available information that we can get? So we're just starting to really just get a sense on what are the campaign materials that folks are using, what are we seeing, what's that conversation like, and then looking to see where are those places that we can score some actual discourse and trying to get a sense of, again, is it some point of social media that may be the place where people feel more free to use things that are more contentious. Or, if you're going door to door, you're probably not going to start utilizing those partisan talking points on, do you believe me? You're going to try to hear what other folks have to say. So that's kind of the first step in seeing if there's any factors that might contribute. So if it's a candidate who is running unopposed and basically already elected in their seat if they were unopposed, do they feel freer to share things that are more contentious or that play into this us versus them versus folks who might be in a more competitive race? So we're hoping to just kind of get a sense on how our state elections really go, just looking at those main races.
It's a fascinating project. Can't wait to see what the results of it are finishing up this fall semester?
Well, we're going to try to track as much as we can. So we'll probably have some public reports from the Gwynn Center this fall. Much more of the deep dives, academic research will start to carry out through the rest of the year as we go forward.
Looking forward to it. Let's end on a positive note. Maybe you haven't gotten to this point in the study just yet, but what can we do as the media, but also we do as the collective community do to lower the temperature, to make it so that the positive reinforcement for candidates is that they're encouraged to use things that are closer to the 8 on this scale, right?
So I think on the media perspective, and one thing that's really hard to study about negative campaigning is that we seem like there's more negative ads out there, but it's part and parcel because there's reporting on negative ads more than there is on positive ads.
Sure.
So some studies, again, have shown that, really the amount of what we would call a negative ad, something that may attack your opponent in one way, shape, or form, or use more negative emotions, those get more attention. And so they also are the ones that news media reports on. So we have this sense that there's more than there might actually be. Kind of same as reporting crime all the time makes us think so that there's more crime. So that's one thing, maybe to highlight some of the positive ads alongside the negative ads so that we have that awareness. And most people are going to be happy to get information either way that they can. But I think more so as voters, as consumers of this information, you have to make it not worth the while of somebody to go negative, right? If you really are asking for, tell me about you, tell me about your policies, I'm going to vote for the candidate that I know more about as an individual than just whether or not they had the best zinger or the cleverest attack ad that comes in my mailer. That's going to be a place. And it's also for people to just start to recognize that language that's there. So if there's something that's emotionally charged, if you pull out that flyer and you see Death Smith,
Sure.
You have to ask yourself, who sent that? Why are they painting this generalized picture or creating the other in this specific way? Why are they using that emotion in the ways that they are? And really be aware, not just to kind of buy in, this makes me fearful and I'm going to try to vote in a way that gets away that fear, but it is to say and recognize, is this something I actually need to be fearful of? Is this a threat? Can I find that information? But more importantly, and especially if we think about some of the things that Beadles is doing, how is he benefiting from supporting those candidates? Why is he putting out those mailers? Sometimes, again, apparently not in conjunction with the candidates that he might be supporting along those ways. What's happening on that side? So being critical consumers ourselves, we can maybe shape the way that folks run their elections by voting for the people and the candidates that have the language that we like best.
And it seems that voters, at least in this primary election earlier this month, did that, and Beadles losing most of the races that he endorsed candidates in. And obviously we'll continue to follow and track that closely as more candidates are endorsed for the general election and beyond. What a fascinating conversation. I'm so glad that we booked you and got you in here. You made some time for us on what should be your summer break to come and chat with us about political rhetoric. Thank you so much, Dr. Amy Pason. We appreciate it.
Thank you for covering our elections, and hopefully people are listening and learning in all the ways they can.
Absolutely. We will have you back. We'll break down all those campaign commercials. It'll be fun.
Fantastic.
A special thanks to Andre Wade, Dr. Amy Pason, and Beth Smith. Before we go, another shameless plug. If you like listening to Ballot Battleground Nevada, do us a huge favor and go vote for us for Best Local Podcast. This show got nominated for the Reno News and Review's Best of Northern Nevada Awards. Go to vote.renonr.com and go to the Culture section to find Best Local Podcast. The final round of voting goes through July 21st. You do have to vote in 10 categories for your vote to be counted. As always, if you have guest ideas, episode ideas, questions, comments, compliments, concerns, feel free to shoot us an email to bjmargiott@sbgtv.com with Ballot Battleground Nevada in the subject line. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next week.